My name is Susie England, and I'm the Service Innovation Manager at the Royal College of Occupational Therapy. And today I'm interviewing Anya.
Hi, my name is Anya, and I'm one of the occupational therapists with Ayrshire and Arran NHS up in Scotland, working on the early intervention frailty service.
And today we're interviewing Anya as part of a piece of Health Education England funded work that sought to define the future proficiencies of allied health professionals. So, our focus in these leadership journeys and this interview is to draw out how occupational therapists are using digital and data skills to innovate their services. So we're going to start with the first question, which is, what one thing have you built into your daily, weekly routine that helps you focus on what you value most about being an occupational therapist?
Ooh, tough question to start with. I think it's about trying to make sure I'm still focusing on people's occupations. Whether that's simple as getting on and off the toilet, or something kind of that might be more of a hobby or activity. I find focusing on that and being able to really notice the small improvements in making that just that little bit easier for somebody. That really, really motivates me.
Brilliant. Oh, it's always good to start with an easy question. So I guess now we're going to move into a little bit about the project that you sort of talked about in your leadership journey. So I think it'd be really useful for people to hear about what prompted you to get into this project area, which is early intervention for frailty services.
So for me, there was probably two reasons really. I only qualified in February, so about sort of 10 months ago. And although, the university and my practice placement educators had tried really hard to give me as full an experience as possible, it was obviously slightly disrupted by COVID. So really felt like I just wanted that time to just kind of get to grips really, I guess, with some of like the core community AT, which maybe I felt I hadn't had the chance to see while I was on placement. And I felt that an early intervention frailty service would just give me that breadth of this kind of core community AT, which I really felt I needed to kind of start my AT career. But I also knew that I've always had a bit of an interest in service improvement and service development, and particularly kind of data. So this idea of this being a new service where there was lots of scope for development and kind of innovation, that's really, really interested me as well. So two reasons, I guess.
It's really interesting, actually. That's interesting that you picked that up actually from the job when you applied for it. That service development was a core part of this role actually.
Yeah, and I think that's probably quite unusual for band five roles as well. So it's felt like an enormous opportunity, real privilege to have this opportunity actually to do it as a band five, because I think traditionally you expect that it's something you can do maybe a little bit later on down in your career.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I guess the next question's a little bit more about why is this particularly important for the profession, wider health and care system and society that we improve in this area? And I suppose I suppose why is it important? It's about the early intervention bit.
Yeah. So we've heard so much about early intervention over the years, haven't we? And preventative approaches and our aging population. And I think we all know the reasons why that's really important. I guess what feels particularly important about the approach within this project is making sure that it really is early. And I
Yeah,
think one of the challenges of that and is particularly with all the kind of media narrative that's there at the moment, I feel like a lot of patients that I go out and see are delaying going to go to primary care because they've seen all these media headlines. And as much as I try and convince them that primary care has been open and is still open, I think that media is very kind of brainwashing in a way, particularly for sort of older people who might be a bit more vulnerable. So people are presenting later and later, I think, to primary care, or certainly from the people that I've been seeing anyway. So if we're relying on getting people into early intervention services because they've already gone to primary care and then getting referred on, I feel like although that's early, it's not as early as it could be. So we need to try and work out how to find these people before they even turn up to the GP surgery. And I guess that's the opportunity that's been really exciting to explore on this project.
yeah, definitely. I feel like I want to drill in a bit more, but I know that there's a lot of the detail of your project is specifically in the leadership journey. So I don't want to ask you the same questions, but I guess I think one question I would be interested to know about. I mean, it's interesting because we do use the word early intervention, a lot. But have you come across anybody of which you've kind of got the other less enthusiastic, or you've got to kind of be able to sell it to them? So I guess the question is, how do you talk about this topic area with others who may be less enthusiastic to gain buy-in?
So I think probably lots of people are not as enthusiastic as me about it. And I guess maybe to start with patients, that probably feels like the right place to start. There's this kind of balance, isn't there, of, once people have had that first fall, or had that first near miss, or just starting to struggle, they can kind of, they're more acutely aware of the benefits that we could bring.
Mm,
Whereas when we're before that, they're kind of thinking, well, I don't need this at the moment. I'm not at that stage yet. And so we're trying to sort of talk about it as it's an opportunity to have all that information in your back pocket, so that you've got it there for when you need it and you can access it more quickly, rather than things kind of escalating, becoming to a crisis, and then suddenly you're trying to put lots of things in a rush, at which point it all becomes kind of quite stressful. And we're also trying to and I don't know whether my patients would say they feel this or not. We have to ask them. But I'm certainly trying to use it as an opportunity to kind of endorse what they're already doing as well. Because I think when we work with people who maybe a little bit later on in their frailty journey, they're often we're really looking at kind of like a problem-based approach rather than the kind of asset-based approach. Whereas when we're seeing people who are still active, who are still, popping out and doing things, it's a really nice to kind of reaffirm that, and then change the conversation to be like, how can we keep you doing that, rather than the conversations that perhaps we might have with people later on in the journey, where it's more like, how can we get back to you doing that, or if you can't do that in that way, how can we adapt it and do it in a different way.
that
And
makes a
I've
lot of
forgotten what your
sense.
actual question was now. I'm hoping that
No,
answers part of it.
yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, really. So I guess, the question was around, how do you talk about this topic area with people that are less enthusiastic? And I guess, you answered that question in terms of people who access services themselves, about, if you get in there early enough, it's about continuing rather than that being that they're
Yeah.
problem focused. I mean, how do you find, I suppose, working with professionals? Do you think that the conversation's different, or do you think that, generally we do think, yes, preventative is the best way forward?
I mean, everyone's like sold on the principle of preventative care, aren't they? But I think sometimes we hear it all the time, we're just so busy firefighting that we kind of almost can't like lift our head up out from that to
Mm,
really engage in. And I think it's really difficult for, a lot of our work is tied really closely to primary care. And I think for a busy GP, and lots of GPs know their patients really well, but they don't know those who are at the very early stages of frailty as well, because they haven't had the opportunity, because they haven't been kind of coming in. So I think the other part of it, and I guess I know this interview is kind of about innovation, but I guess my kind of like segue into that was like the data behind it. And I think the data is a really good way to talk through that. So we did some really interesting kind of screening at the beginning, looking at the moderate EFI list, and looking at those who had had OT interventions. And it was a really small proportion who had actually seen an OT. And I understand that the electronic frailty index is coded on medical conditions, and like with any algorithm, the quality of the data that you put in determines the quality of the output. So there's a whole host of kind of caveats around that. And I understand that you can be medically quite frail and that not yet to have affected your function.
mm,
But it was still, given all of those caveats, it was still really staggering that such a small proportion of patients had had OT. And being able to kind of show that pie chart was really, really helpful. So I think the data's been useful to try and kind of illustrate that point, and then also kind of illustrate our outcomes as well, because we're not going to be avoiding a hospital admission today. These aren't people who are at risk of going into hospital today. So it's trying to find different ways to kind of articulate our benefit, particularly because they're not the benefits that the GP is going to realize next month, because the patient's already a frequent flyer, hate the word, but already going to GPs quite a lot and suddenly won't, because actually these people aren't really going to GPs that often yet. So it's trying to find a different way to talk about it. And I guess for me, data's been really powerful in doing that.
that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Two of my favorite words: data and outcomes. So we're going to kind of move on from the project area to more problem solving, which is obviously a key part of any sort of innovative project. And so I guess I'd be keen to know what early setbacks later gave you an advantage. Was there anything that happened early on that made you that actually, changed the project for good?
Lots of problems, lots of not all of which I've solved or we've solved. Um, I think one of the challenges was around like generation of referrals um and I take full ownership of this. So I'm an incredibly impatient person. It's one of my many, many flaws. But I think when you're kind of waiting to meet GPs and explain the service, and they're obviously really busy, and also the culture at the moment is that everybody wants to go and sell their service to GPs and be kind of co-located, so there's an awful lot of competition for their kind of attention. Um, and so that was proving kind of really, really difficult. And then when we were able to get the data from the electronic frailty index, I was then able to start seeing their patients, and then kind of almost like, because I then had access to the GP record system, and I was able to write in to say, oh, I've seen Mr. and Mrs. So and so, and this is my assessment, and these are the interventions that I'm going to be planning, and then drop a note in a couple of weeks later to say, well, this is what we've done, and this is a summary of our interventions. That kind of drip by drip actually probably, I think, had more of an impact, because the doctor could see, or the GP rather, or any of the members of primary care actually, because the advanced nurse practitioners, FCP physios have all been great as well. I think could really see much more of a tangible impact of what I was doing, because I think I mean, ATs do this, but you start to look at kind of a lot of the voluntary sector services that are going in, some of the mental health services that are going in, and we all talk about our services using the same bunch of buzzwords. And I'm just as guilty of this as the next service. We talk about well-being, we talk about self-management, we talk about knowledge, confidence, and skills, and they all kind of sometimes sound the same. So I think not having a lot of access to the GPs to kind of sell the service early on meant that I had to rely on another way of getting patients. And that was able to kind of almost prove the point, and was like a better PR exercise than just trying to tell them, because they could see in the notes what we were doing.
I
Didn't
love
feel like
that.
it at the time, but in retrospect now, I think it was really useful.
I love that because it's also using existing tools as well, already using existing data, existing tools,
Yeah,
and then yeah, demonstrating, because I think there's a lot of what OTs do actually do. They do demonstrate it, and so
yeah,
the fact that it's a continuous demonstration you
yeah,
can do is better than the
absolutely.
buzzwords and the selling side of things.
Yeah.
Although we used to do that as well, but
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Because there's a lot of kind of focus, isn't there, on building relationships, and that's so, so important. And I guess because it was really difficult to build a relationship in a kind of in a typical sense of like popping in when they all have coffee in the morning or anything like that, I had to take a slightly different approach. And kind of data and relationships, you tend to think of being completely separate, but actually I feel like the data really helped build the relationships in a weird kind of way.
I really like the fact that you used the data that they'd already logged. I,
Yeah,
I think there's something really amazing about that. Because sometimes we think we have to collect our own data, which we do, but
yeah.
there's so much data out there that actually that we can use in a better way. Anyway, I'm digressing, but I it's just
We
it's
can
such a
digress into data all you like.
it's such for me that's just like it's like such a key point of this project, really, how you used existing data from another
Yeah,
stakeholder.
yeah.
um yeah, so okay, so let's move on from early setbacks to later gave you an advantage to this is going to be an interesting question for you. Being so new into your role as an occupational therapist, how did you use your experience to influence your decision making in this project? And I'd be really interested to know, particularly about your experience as an OT, which is quite short at the
Yes, yeah,
moment,
very short.
versus any other experience that perhaps from previous roles before you trained that helps you make decisions now as an occupational therapist.
So I was really lucky. I'd had quite a lot of experience around developing services in primary care before retraining as an OT. And I guess that's why the service development aspects of this project really, really attracted me. In terms of my decision making as an OT, it doesn't all come back down to data, but I think the data kind of helped give me a little bit of confidence with that as well, because it kind of felt like I could sometimes you get a gut feeling and you're like, because I don't know whether my gut feeling is well trained or not yet, isn't like my OT gut,
Yeah.
that anatomical feature of my OT gut. I think that helped kind of clarify, you know, am I getting enough people? Am I screening the right kind of end of the frailty spectrum? So that helped kind of match that the clinical data, the stuff that was coming off the EFI, and that kind of gut feeling you get of, oh, this really doesn't sound like it's early intervention, or oh, this kind of absolutely does. I think colleagues make a massive difference, of course, as well. So kind of having people to like bounce those ideas across, kind of review patients, and almost kind of a little bit of trial and error. We were really lucky that we had really close relationships with the community rehab team, which I guess is kind of the service which would typically deal with patients who are just a little bit further on in their frailty journey. So it was really helpful having those relationships to kind of gauge where the patients were sitting. So that helped with my decision making. Lots of reflection, and actually like a really supportive team, so I could turn around and be like, I think I've made the wrong decision, because I definitely didn't get them all right. So that really helped as well, to be able to reflect and have the flexibility within the services to be able to make sure they then were seen by the right service if actually they weren't quite so early intervention.
It's been a really key point that's come through all of the 3 projects, actually, about that whole, the much broader stakeholders, for all sorts of different reasons. Sometimes because those stakeholders have a really quick answer to something you've been struggling with for a long time.
Yeah.
That has been interesting. And then I think in another example, it's been where not one person has the answer, but those minds coming together around what they all struggle with to come up with something unique. So I can really see why your colleagues in this situation alongside the data kind of helped you to, I guess, for you, it's obviously around confidence as a new OT, but it's much more than that, really. I think even, when you're 15, 20 years into your career like me.
That's reassuring to me.
Yeah, that kind of coming together, that, are you seeing what I'm seeing? What's your take on it? Yeah. So, while we're still on the decision making, would you make the same decisions again? Was there any aspect of the project where you'd be like, yeah, definitely do that again? Or so, conversely, I wouldn't tackle it this way again.
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know. I guess it's like a really specific example, but I guess it kind of illustrates the point. And that's about, at what point in like the journey of developing something do you know that you've got a slightly suboptimal process, that's quite labor intensive, and there's got to be a quicker and easier way of doing this. But in order to get the quicker and easier way, you've got to go and ask someone who's quite busy in a GP practice. And so you kind of don't feel like you've almost got permission, or you've earned the right to go and do that, because you haven't really proved the impact of what you're doing. So I was really cautious, I think, certainly for the first kind of 4 to 6 months, of kind of asking too much of this fantastic kind of admin colleague in primary care. And what that meant was that I ended up kind of writing all of my own letters to the patients. So I had to kind of manually populate the name, and I triple checked it, because I was just really anxious of, making an information governance error or something like that. And after kind of 6 months or so, I felt like, I felt like I've got enough of a relationship with her. I felt like we've proved enough of the value that we're adding to the surgery, that I can ask her for 20 minutes of her time to show me this little like work through, so that I can get the letter template on the system. And now I don't have to write out the name and address, which saves me probably 5 minutes, plus a lot of anxiety per letter. So it's that personal thing of, how much do I ask for, and how much do I just want the project to work? So I create a kind of workaround. And that's really difficult, because it gets the project up off the ground, gets it working, but it does have big questions in terms of scalability as well. So, actually, is that something that's like realistic to ask like other colleagues in the service to do if they're spreading it like a similar screening process out to their practices? Is this really like the best use of my time, considering we didn't have any kind of admin support at the time? So I think I probably could have been a bit more confident, and kind of not felt like I've had to earn the right to ask for that kind of help, because it would have saved me time earlier. So yeah, I would have probably tried to have been a bit bolder and asked for that kind of help beforehand. But it comes back to that relationship, isn't it? And you just kind of, you don't want to do anything to jeopardize it. You don't want to ask, even though they're lovely and super helpful and honestly brilliant, you still kind of hold back a little bit.
So I just had to mic myself then because my dog is barking at the
Oh, no.
delivery. So if he continues,
Well, he's obviously got some really important views to say, far more
yeah.
important than mine probably on decision making.
Yeah, I think what I think though what you were describing there, I just think it's such an important part of quality improvement in terms of at what point, in terms of that testing, does actually like right, yeah, we've tested this now, we've proved it now, like how how do we, get how much is enough? And I think that's what that point just
Yeah,
really raised to me. And actually,
yeah,
it's a really common question. But people often say to me, how long do I need to collect data for? I feel like we've evidence that we're making a difference. And I always find that really an interesting question, really. I suppose there's
yeah,
always room for continuous improvement is the answer that I normally give.
yeah. It's hard, isn't it? It's such a difficult balance. And there's so many things that you just think, oh, I'll just carry on for the month, it'll be fine. But then when you actually sit down and think about the time that's taking, you're like, well, actually, there's probably a way to make this a bit better.
Yeah. Oh, so let's go on to then. This is the last question in terms of problem solving, and this is something again that I think is can be tricky, and I
Okay.
guess there's something to learn from this from different perspectives. But I'm assuming at some point you probably had some conflict in the project, and sometimes it's either with your team or perhaps maybe even an interaction between your team and another. How do you resolve conflict within a project? What have you got any sort of tips for other people?
No, I'd love to hear other people's tips. Not because we've had lots of conflict, but just because it's something I've always found difficult. I think one area of it that definitely is difficult is around kind of like a general kind of confidence with data and confidence with kind of like databases and things like that. And I know when you guys gave me this opportunity to talk about the project, it was really, really grateful. But I was also like, we haven't done anything complicated. We've just got a couple of Excel spreadsheets, and it's all very kind of low tech in that regard. Um, but actually, I sometimes forget like how lucky I've been in kind of previous careers, maybe to have had a lot of exposure to kind of Excel and to feel quite comfortable with that. And I sometimes kind of forget that that's not something that's kind of core to lots of people's journeys through the profession, and recognizing that kind of spreadsheets can feel a bit daunting. So I think kind of supporting everybody to feel comfortable to do that is really important. And I guess it's also then the reporting as well. So I know not in this team, but in kind of previous teams before, you generate a lot of data and it just sort of seems to go into this black hole and you never really know what comes out of it. And so in those situations, it can be quite hard to be motivated to do the data collection in the first place and then spend the time putting it on the systems. So I think what has been really helpful is to have a really clear kind of pathway of what that data does. So like I was able to pull a report for a meeting that I had to go to last week, where I was able to look at all the patients in the locality that I've seen, and their outcome measures. And actually, it was a really satisfying bit of work to do, and it really helped my motivation to continue to update the systems, because I was like, oh, look, I can see that this has been the improvement in my patients. And it was just the kind of reminder I needed that week that it's okay, I am making a difference sometimes. Um, so I think just trying to recognize that people have got different skills and different levels of kind of confidence with data, um, and just making sure that they feel the direct benefits of collecting it and reporting on it.
Yeah, honestly, so many great points that you raised there actually about data. And yeah, I know I find myself in the same boat really when I think to myself I've only got a small amount of data that perhaps sometimes feels quite incomplete as well.
Yeah,
But I think there's some power, isn't there, in sharing that with other people, for people to ask questions and also to kind of add to that picture. So but I mean that was
yeah.
just one point in particular, but
Yeah, but I mean, if you've got loads of data that you feel is quite incomplete, like, I mean, gosh, that would be so reassuring to hear, wouldn't it? Because I think so often as a professional, you only hear people only feel confident to share the data when they've got like a massive N number and it's all complete and it's all double-ended and it's all, nice and tidy. And the reality of services is that okay, research is slightly different, but like the reality of services that is it's not neat and tidy, is it, all the time? Like
mm,
it's not always double-ended. It's a bit of a mixed match. So it'd be
yeah.
lovely to hear examples from fellow professionals of that, because otherwise you just feel like the bar is up here and you're thinking, oh my gosh, my data really fits down here.
And for sure that's what we want to definitely do with the innovation hub really is to bring it's also a bit like a puzzle,
Yeah.
being able to sort of bring together different projects of a similar type and to look at what people have learned and to see if we can piece things together and whether there's some useful insights of bringing similar projects together. Like, for example, I'd imagine you'd be quite interested in any other occupational therapists that have looked at different ways of trying to find people at the earliest point when they
Yeah.
might need.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they might have tackled it a different way. And you see, merging of those two projects could be quite powerful. So we're also getting very excited now. So we're going to move on to the last bit of the interview, which is very much about leadership. And I feel really, really strongly about leadership at different levels. Leadership as a student, leadership as new into practice. And so I'm really excited to hear some of your answers to these questions around leadership. So what challenges do occupational therapy leaders face? That's the first part of the question, and I suppose for you it might be what do you perceive might be the challenges for occupational therapy leaders? And do you have any suggestions for other occupational therapists developing their leadership skills?
Oh gosh, these questions are getting harder and harder, aren't they?
And it's okay to be perceived because you are early on in your career, but I don't want at the same time to sort of you to think, oh, I'm not a leader, because you are. It'd be interesting to see what you think the challenges are that occupational therapy leaders, or what you anticipate you might
So
encounter as your career develops.
it's interesting because I've done quite a lot of kind of like leadership stuff before training as an AT, and I'm kind of wondering what's the difference about in that question. Just not to answer the question, but just to unpick the question instead and flip it back. Is like what's different about being an AT leader as opposed to kind of any other type of leader within healthcare, and like what are the unique things around AT that perhaps make that more difficult. And I think we're a really passionate profession, aren't we? We've all got our own ideas, and actually one of the things that really attracted me to the profession was the kind of creativity of it. And I guess that means that we've all got kind of maybe slightly our own ways of doing it. We've all come from slightly different approaches, and that, like, I guess gives the richness of the profession and makes teams great because you've got so many different perspectives and people think really differently. That probably means that we've all got slightly different styles as well. I guess perhaps more so maybe than in other professions. I don't know. I've not been in another profession, so I wouldn't really be able to comment. But I think the breadth of AT and the breadth of what can be covered within AT probably makes that much harder.
I love that. I love your first answer as well, which was around why are we different? Why do we think we might be different? But but also it's interesting that you sort of talked about creativity, because that makes me also think about something else that kind of quite often they say we struggle as occupational therapists evidencing our value. And I feel like this is the same answer really, because we're so diverse and broad, it looks a little bit different sometimes. And that's interesting how you answered that around leadership, that maybe some of our leadership looks different because we've come at the career from different places. We work differently. I mean, I'm now answering the question because I feel quite
Well, I can't
inspired.
answer it, so please answer it.
I feel quite inspired by your answer, especially new into the profession. And I think that's a question I'm going to be asking people. Why do we think our leadership would be different? So let's move on to the next one then, which is you've kind of half answered this really. What would you say makes you different from other professional groups? And it sounds like in a funny sort of way you've said perhaps the fact that the creativity. I wonder if there's anything
Yeah.
you might add.
It's funny because I don't count myself as being a particularly creative person. But I do think there's something about thinking creatively in AT and kind of holistic. I really want to say being really person-centered, and I have to admit that was one of the things that really attracted me to the profession. But I'm also acutely aware from my own experience as a patient and from working in an MDT setting, is that we don't have a monopoly on person-centered care. It's not just something that OTs do. Like every profession can be and probably are really person-centered. It just feels like something that's particularly important to us as ATs. I think all the kind of thinking of a little bit of everything, thinking outside the box. But again, I'm sure our physio colleagues or our speech and language colleagues would probably challenge us on that and say we haven't got a monopoly on it. Um, so I honestly, yeah, I don't know, but it's the little things, isn't it, that add up that actually we can become the really big things. And I think that ability to look at the big picture and the minute aspect of a really tiny bit of task analysis and kind of change that focus from like massive to really tiny is quite a skill. I'm still trying to learn it. And I guess that's something that I feel is possibly quite unique to AT.
Yeah, that does crop up quite a bit, really, with a lot of it cropped up with occupational therapists that have stepped into digital transformation roles when we developed the data and innovation strategy, and it's cropping up now with the innovation hub, that whole thing around, we work with people to know what they need to do, to break it down, to problem
Yeah.
solve. We look at the context, we look at the person and their skills and their strengths, and it does feel like that really lends itself to innovation. And then, oh, what did you say there about the other professional groups? I was just thinking what you said about person-centered, our person-centered approach. And I think you're spot on, really. I think we don't have the monopoly on that, but at the same time, we've kind of worked in this way for so long. It's almost like perhaps we've got an opportunity here to lead the way on how you evidence how that looks like good person-centered care. But it's my
I mean, that's like a whole other interview topic, isn't
yes.
it?
So you might be surprised to know we're on our very last question, and I guess there could be some different answers to this, because we've talked about quite a few different themes through this interview, which is how do you see this topic evolving over the next 5 years? And you have freedom here to talk about either early intervention or data in the profession, or even problem solving.
Oh, I don't know. I guess kind of data is probably. Can I talk about data? Is that okay?
Yes, I'd love to talk about
I don't feel
data.
like I need to ask permission from you to talk about data. I guess in the next 5 years, where would I like to see data go? I feel like it should just become almost kind of not this like additional extra that requires all this extra effort. I feel like if we could just consider it as, and I'm sure this happens in a lot of places, um, but just kind of make it feel more normal, and also kind of accept it as like data. Just because it's numbers and quantitative doesn't mean it's not person centered. I feel like sometimes like we can fall into a kind of bit of a binary idea of it's kind of either qualitative and like really person centered and very AT focused, or it can be very quantitative. And I feel like we need to just have a bit more of a detailed understanding that you need both. You need a mixture of them both. A bunch of outcome measures that say we've got a 25% improvement in this by itself can be just as meaningless as a really nice quote from a patient that says, "Oh, I can do this now." Like you need the breadth of everything, and I'd love it if we could have a more kind of inclusive approach to data, and also support all of our colleagues to feel a bit more confident about it as well. So I definitely, within the AT profession, kind of like generally feel like a bit of an outsider for kind of liking numbers. And sometimes it feels like you can't like numbers and be nice and person centered at the same time. And I feel like you can. And I'm not sure we've really kind of developed a culture where you can do that. It certainly wasn't something that kind of was front and center in university. And I guess it's also kind of data, making data really accessible. So there's this halfway house, isn't there? I mean, of like adding up some numbers and getting like a total. And then the kind of all of the statistics that we did for our research module at university, which even though I love data, hand on heart really struggles with the statistics side of it, and have literally not used since. And it kind of feels like there's this middle ground of data, which is not the kind of statistical analysis that you'll do in research, but it's a bit more than just, okay, we had 5 patients referred this week, we had, you know, 4 patients discharged this week, and so we've done this many assessments. It's this kind of middle ground, and I'd love to see that explored a bit more, because service development isn't research, like, so you're not going to be using the same tools. And I just would love the profession to really get excited about this middle ground, and I guess also within that have the right forums to share that as well. So we're looking at saying like, how can we share what we've done so far? And you start to look through the journals and things like that, and oh god, we haven't got, service improvement, we haven't got ethics, we haven't got some statistical methodology person. There's no way we're going to jump through all the hurdles for some of the peer reviewed journals. And with the greatest respect, 18 News doesn't sometimes kind of allow you to go into that level of detail that we feel like we want to share, and we've done the work and we'd want to share it. So I feel like as a profession, and I'm sure this is probably not just limited to AT, that we need a kind of almost like a journal of like service stuff, which isn't statistical stuff, but it's just this middle ground of, it's more than 18 News, but it's not a peer reviewed journal. And I say that with the greatest respect to OT News. How do we have this middle ground so that we can start sharing about it? Because there's probably loads of people there who've got these like PowerPoints on their laptops with some really nice graphs, and they're like, oh, I'm really proud of the work that my service is doing. But apart from a couple of internal meetings, we rarely get the chance to share that. So I guess that's what I'd like to see. Sorry, very long-winded question to answer. It's
That's a
probably like
great
5 years.
answer.
5 years have passed before I've answered the question.
It was such a great answer, again, on so many levels. And I think, I think that's a really great summary of this whole HE funded project on modernising the profession, because it was about trying to normalise it. These leadership journeys, this interview, the live Q&A session in the end of January is all about trying to normalise how OTs are using digital and their data skills to services. So I'm so pleased that you saved that golden nugget for the final. But also, I think the other thing is you're absolutely spot on with the gap that you see between um, a BJOT or a journal, peer-reviewed journal,
Yeah.
and an OT news. And I really hope, I'm not just saying this as the project manager for the Innovation Hub, but I really hope that we can shape that with members, so that it does start to become a space where people can learn from service development.
Yeah.
So that's a really great way to end.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to learning from everyone else's stuff in the Innovation Hub then, actually. It sounds like a great resource.
Well, I hope people will listen to this interview and think, oh, I've got a graph or a presentation
Yeah,
actually on
I'd
my
love to see
laptop.
them. I love looking at people's graphs.
And if they do, send an improvement journey to our COT. It takes 15 minutes to do it. So I'm going to end this interview, but obviously just wish you the best of luck with your career. I
Thank you.
personally, having been 20 years now into this profession, I'm really excited about your journey, and no doubt lots of other new into practice journeys, to see how much you're going to make a difference in terms of data, service development. So I do wish you the best of luck with your career.
Thank you
And
very much.
thank
Thank you.
you so much for being willing to interview and get over your imposter syndrome.
No, it's
So
been great to have the opportunity, and also just thank you to everyone that's helped me get to this point. So, like lecturers at university and all of my colleagues in the service as well. It's not just me that's been doing it; a bit of a team.
brilliant.